Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Plazo, and I'm the Division Manager of the Special Collections Division here at Main Library. Welcome to today's program with Judy James, former manager of Special Collections Division and author of the new book, Akron Family Recipes, History and Traditions from Sauerkraut Balls to Sweet Potato Pie. We are all hungry already. Along with Judy today, we'd also like to welcome Bob Ethington, former manager of the Popular Culture and Audiovisual Division, who is now on the board of the Friends of Main Library. I'd also like to thank our Friends group for helping us with this program today. Thank you so much. Before we begin, a couple housekeeping announcements. Restrooms are outside, around the corner to the right and left, depending on which door you go out. Also, today's program is being recorded and will be available next week on the library's website, on our Special Collections webpage, on our classes and programs link. If you have any questions about where it's at, you can just give our division a call. After the program, we'll take a little time for questions, and then if you might have noticed on your way in outside, the Friends of the Library are selling copies of Judy's book, and Judy will also be available in person to sign them after the program. When we take questions, there is a microphone we have set up over here if you'd like to stand in line and take questions, but I'm also free to run around and be hostess and give you the mic if you can't get over there. I will say that Judy's book not only honors so many of Akron's families and their legacy recipes, it's also an excellent local history book with brief, well-captured histories about so many of Akron's immigrants and city settlers. There are gems of information in her book that you won't find together anywhere else. Me, having been fortunate enough to be a librarian under Judy's supervision for so many years, I've watched her organize and lay the groundwork for the future, not only for the creation of our Special Collections Division, but also with preserving important stories from the past in this book. I can easily see other cities using this book as a template to help them document their own local histories. I could go on and on about how Judy has been so important in my life, both personally and professionally, but I think one thing we should all remember today are Judy's loving words of dedication in her book to her husband, Jeff, La vida buena. Life is good when we can appreciate a delicious home-cooked meal that brings us all together. And now I hand it over to Bob and Judy. Thank you.
Okay, so this is working. Can you hear me okay?
Can you hear me?
That's more important that you can hear her. Okay.
All right.
Well, it's nice to be back here. I retired a couple years ago and did a lot of programs here with sponsored by the Friends of Main Library, and I have a lot of great memories about doing programs here. So it was nice to be asked to come back and do this. At first, I felt it was kind of like it's like the Elvis comeback special, sort of. But actually being here and looking and seeing everyone who's here, it's more like being in library heaven, because it's like there's a lot of people that worked here at the library over the years that I haven't seen for a long time, and it's really great to see so many of you and everyone who's come. It's just great. Now, Judy and I, we go way back. I was thinking that we've known each other for almost 45 years.
I think so.
We first met when you and Jeff were living on Mull Avenue, and I moved into Mull Avenue, and then my to-be wife, Ricky, and then she was there, and then, of course, Ricky's a former librarian as well, so we lived across the street from you guys. This is around late 70s, 80s, somewhere around there.
Yeah, early 80s.
Yeah. I remember a lot of good parties at your house.
Oh, yes. We won't talk about that too much.
But anyway, so we go way back. When we first met, were you working for the library?
No, I don't. Oh, yeah, I was, but I hadn't gone to library school yet, I don't think.
Right.
But yeah, I was working for the library.
So
Yep.
tell us a little bit about your history working here. Just
Oh,
shortly.
my gosh. Well, I started when I was 16 at the Maple Valley branch when I was, we were called pages. They're now student assistants. And then I went to Ohio State. I worked at the Ohio State University Library. Then I came back with a degree in art history, which of course, doesn't get anybody a job. And almost immediately got a job in the technical services department at Main Library. And then I thought, if I'm going to do this, I guess I better go to library school. So I think I went before you. Yeah, went to library school, and I guess the rest is history. I worked in various departments here at Main Library, and ultimately, the last 15 years, I was the manager of special collections. I was the first manager of special collections. It kind of started with them hiring me in 2001. That was a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, this building is a little over 20 years old now, I think. And when it first opened, I used to always tell people that there were 3 jewels at Main Library. And one of them was their children's library, which is a wonderful place. And the second one was this fantastic auditorium, which has had so many great events, speaker events, musical concerts, what have you, movies. I'd say over the years, there's been a couple more added. I would say the Friends of Main Library Bookshop is really a terrific place. I highly recommend stopping there sometime. They do a great job of collating and putting those really high-level used books out for sale, very cheap. And the Tech Zone, which is on the first floor, which is really an amazing place, and I highly recommend that. But the other one, I guess the 5th jewel, is Special Collections and Local History, which if you aren't familiar with that, it's on our 3rd floor, and it is really a center of local history, of archival information, of photos, local author material, and also where they do fantastic work with genealogy and can help you with all kinds of family history stuff. And Mary has done a great job of being the second manager of that department, and her staff is terrific. But yes.
Yay, Mary.
But I have to say that Judy is the one who really created that department and set up the template for it, and that's an amazing achievement, and you should be very proud of that.
Thank you. It was a joy to go to work every day.
Good.
I have to, I've told my kids, if you have to find a job, find something you love to do. And I loved going to my job every single day.
That's
I really, truly did.
Yeah, I know you did. So now, that was one great achievement. Now you have a second one, and that is this new book, Akron Family Recipes. And it's so exciting to see this come out, and all the response to it has been so great. I'm just curious, what was the original inspiration for writing this book? Like, when did that start kind of fomenting in your head that you wanted to do this?
I think fomenting is the right word. I didn't have, like a light bulb moment. I started thinking about it. I started kind of percolating in my head, I think when we created Special Collections, because one of the things that we decided to do, one of the things we decided to focus on was to collect and preserve the history of Akron's ethnic and cultural groups, because we recognized that, there just wasn't that much information about these groups. And also, these groups are dying. Once upon a time, there were something like, 35 Italian clubs in Akron, believe it or not, and probably just as many German and Hungarian clubs. But, over time, they died out. People I think they don't feel necessarily connected to their ethnic roots anymore. Very few people are 100% Italian or 100% Hungarian. And so, one by one, we're losing these clubs. The Italian Center on Talmadge Avenue just closed a few months ago, which was kind of sad to see. Of course, that neighborhood's being taken over by our newest immigrants, which is wonderful. So there was that. And then I love cookbooks. I've always liked cookbooks. And I love community cookbooks. It's one of the things that I buy when I'm on vacation. I like to buy cookbooks from different communities. But one of the things that's always bothered me about community cookbooks, and this I think mostly, the ones that were published back in, the late 19th century, early to mid 20th century, is the fact that they didn't really tell a story. You'd see Mrs. Harry Smith's peach cobbler recipe. Well, did she have a first name? And you'll see that in the newspapers too, in the old newspapers. I mean, you'd see obituaries, and it would be Mrs. Harry Smith died.
Yeah.
Well, tell me more. Who's Mary Smith, Harry Smith, or Mrs. Harry Smith? But there was, nothing about the recipe. Like, did she bring it over on the boat with her, or did she, was her grandmother's recipe? What's the story of her recipe? So that was sort of, I started thinking that, maybe I could do something that would kind of elevate that community cookbook model to a new level, to tell the story of the recipe and the creator, and also the stories of the community. I guess my cookbook is officially called an ethnographic cookbook, if you want to be scholarly about it. And then in 2015, and some of you might remember this, we did a display about Akron's old restaurants, the restaurants of days gone by. And for those of you, I'm thinking most of you, probably remember the days when there was no Applebee's and no Outback Steakhouse, and all the restaurants were locally owned. They were owned by families, and they were proudly owned by families. And of course, that's no longer the case anymore. Yeah. And so, anyway, we did this really cool exhibit, and all these families who had owned restaurants, they loaned us or donated really cool things. We got Nick Anthony's, glasses, the cocktail glasses with his eyeglasses on them, and Nick Yanko's box of original cocktail recipes, and it was really cool, and it was very popular, right, Mary? It was very popular. And we did an opening reception where we invited people to come, and the folks who had donated and loaned stuff to us to come. And it was kind of emotional. They all knew each other, and people I didn't even know were hugging me, and people were standing at the display case with tears running down their cheeks. They were so moved and so honored, that we did that. So but they talked about recipes. They were all talking about, oh, remember this recipe, remember that recipe. And then, I don't know, I just kept thinking more about it, and I mentioned it to a friend of mine who's in the publishing industry, and she said, oh my gosh, Judy, you should absolutely do this. Well, this was before I retired, so I'm thinking, oh, no, I'm not gonna, no. In fact, before I retired, a local author said to me, I just have one piece of advice: do not write a book when you retire. I don't know. And then I happened to mention it to my daughter, Anna, our daughter Anna, and she said, Mom, if you don't write this book, who's going to do it? She said, you are the perfect person to write this book. These are your three favorite things: food, local history, and family history. And she was right. And so I guess I'm sorry, that was a very long answer to that question. That was a long answer to that question. But and then I just found myself doing it.
So how did you begin doing it? Like, what were your methods for researching this?
Well, the first thing I did, because I knew I was going to have to get these recipes somewhere or another, so I contacted Jane Snow, who was a former food writer for the Beacon Journal, and also Katie Byard, who also at that time was writing the food columns for the Beacon, and I asked them to put something, in their columns, and they did, which was wonderful. I started a Facebook page, and then I started my research, of course, in special collections, because I knew what special collections had. I knew the books they had, the archival collections, the church histories, the club histories. So I kind of started there. I used probably and also there were a couple of notable dissertations and theses that I used. Dr. Shirley McLean's history of, I believe it was her master's thesis? Yeah, her master's thesis about the history of, I'm sorry? Was it her dissertation? Okay. Yeah, you're right, it was her dissertation. On the history of blacks in Akron, 1865 to 1975, was a huge help for me. And I'm just still astounded by the depth of her research, because she didn't have databases, And also Dr. Helga Kaplan wrote a wonderful history, also a dissertation of the history of Jews in Akron, and there were a couple of master's theses about the Appalachian folks who came here, and so those were really helpful. But the thing that I probably used the most was the Beacon Journal. Mm-hmm. And until just a few years ago, the Beacon Journal was kind of a big black hole because there was no way to access the information that was in, the Beacon going back to 1841. There were some really kind of rudimentary indexes that were done by the WPA, which were not terribly helpful, but in the last, 10 or so years, it's been digitized, which means I was able to search keywords, I could search phrases, I could search, names of people, names of restaurants, names of businesses, clubs, organizations, churches. So, I'm not sure, if I didn't have the Beacon Journal, I'm not sure I would have done this project, or if I didn't have that access to the Beacon Journal.
Right.
And then, of course, I used Ancestry.com a lot to research the individuals, because sometimes when I would interview these folks about their recipes, they didn't always know too much about their family members. So I shared a lot of information with them and kind of brought tears to the eyes of some people. And, one of a really great resource, and if you folks don't know about it, you should discover this. The Summit County Clerk of Courts has digitized the Summit County naturalization records, which are the citizenship records. So between, I want to say the 1860s and maybe the 1980s. And they are a huge and valuable resource. If you look at a declaration of intent for an immigrant, it includes, the village they came from in Italy and when they came over and the name of the boat they came on and their birth date and what they did for a living. Sometimes there's a photograph, a physical description, it might say, mole on, left ear or whatever. But just Google Summit County naturalization records and you'll find them. So I really had quite a lot of resources at my disposal and certainly my genealogy and local history skills came.
Yeah, well, a couple times you've mentioned people tearing up. But I think that's, I think that food is so related to memory for people, and good memories, not so good memories, whatever. But they often can be connected to what they had, what mom served, or what their aunt served, or family stuff.
I would agree, and I think if there's any takeaway that I hope people get from my book is that the importance of preserving your family recipes, because they really are a huge piece of your family's history, and they're so evocative. My mother-in-law's fried chicken recipe, which my sister-in-law made last night for us. She didn't write it down, but my sister-in-law said, "Mom, you have to write your recipe down." Right. And she died not long after that. And a few years ago, maybe just a couple of years ago, there was an article in the New York Times about how your kids don't want your crap. They don't want your china, they don't want your Lenox, they don't want your crystal, they don't want your lace tablecloths anymore. And that may be the case, but I think you can make an argument for the fact that, one, recipes don't have to be dusted. And I would argue that they're more meaningful in some ways than, a pair of candlesticks.
Yeah, right.
And they don't take up any space.
So you talked about how you began your research and a lot of your methods for that. So what kind of difficulties did you face? Were you looking for certain recipes that might be harder to access? Did you get a lot of cooperation from people when you actually talked to them, or not so much? Quite varied, I guess.
It did vary. When the article appeared in Katie's column and also Jane Snow's blog, I was just sure that I was going to be inundated, with hundreds of recipes, and I was going to have to pick and choose which ones I was actually going to include in my book. And that was not the case, unfortunately. However, very soon after Katie's article appeared in the paper, I did get a call from Sandy Clark with the German Family Society. They're out in Brimfield. And she invited me to come out and meet her ladies, and they sat down and they said, "Oh, these are the must-haves. You must have Sauerkraut and rouladen and whatever." And they were wonderful. And I thought, "Oh, this is going to be easy." And then some were easier than others. There were some people who were quite reticent initially. I think people sometimes they didn't quite understand what I was trying to do, and they were a little hesitant. I can say that there were people who refused to share their recipes with me. In fact, I'll just tell this quick story. I found this recipe for macaroni and cheese, and through just the Beacon Journal and various other things, I tracked this lady down. Well, her daughter called me, and she said, "I'm so excited." She said, "We don't have that recipe anymore. Nobody has my grandmother's recipe." And I said, "Oh, I'll email it to you." And I emailed it to her, and I said, love to include it and her story in my book. Didn't hear from her. 2 weeks later, she called me, and she said, "Well, we've discussed it, and I'm sorry, you can use it, but only if we get a cut of the profits of your book." And I said, "Well, no, sorry. I did get a macaroni and cheese recipe, so we solved that problem." But yeah, and and not to generalize, but there were some groups that were a little more, is the word gracious, open? I'm not sure. I'm not going to go into that too much, but I can tell you that the Greeks, that was one of my favorite chapters, because, I called them, they said, "Well, you must come to my house. We must meet for coffee," and then they would serve me pastries. So that was and plus I really love Greek food, so that was a very, very fun chapter to work on. Difficulties, yeah. And I did work with a lot of older people. Of course, I'm in that category now, but people who don't use email. So I was on the phone or going to people's homes with my little recorder, and which was very fun.
Sure.
That was really fun. And it was, I've already mentioned that it was sort of emotional. I'll just tell a quick story here. One lady, I called and I left a voicemail for her. She didn't answer, and I left a voicemail, and she called me back the next day, and she said, "The reason I missed your call is because I was sitting in the backyard." Her mother had passed away. She said, "I was sitting in the backyard looking through my mother's recipe box and weeping." I know. So, yeah. Anyway, difficulties, yeah. It wasn't. And if any of you are writers, I have the utmost respect for you. It's hard. It's hard work.
So, as we all know, Akron's a very diverse community. So, how did you go about deciding which ethnicities, nationalities you definitely needed to include in the book?
Yeah. That was difficult, and I struggled mightily with that. I ultimately based it on population. I kind of went back and forth with, do I choose the ones who I think have had the greatest impact on our culinary history, or do I go with the groups that are the largest? And so my example was, well, the Irish, I don't know if any of you are in here who are Irish, but they didn't contribute a whole lot to our community, our food history too much. But the Lebanese did. But the Lebanese is quite small. And I thought, well, if I leave out the Irish, I think it would be unforgivable, because they were one of our largest groups and our earliest people to come here. So I thought, the easiest way to do this is just to keep it by population.
Was it like there's only so many potato recipes?
That was a hard chapter. It was a hard chapter to work on. Yeah, there are only so many potato recipes. And there was some criticism that I didn't include our most recent immigrants, and it was even suggested to me that at the very least I should include a chapter on Akron's Nepali and Bhutanese community, or one chapter with just multiple recipes from multiple groups. And I just felt very strongly that would be an afterthought, that those folks are deserving of their own book. And I still feel that way. So that's another book.
That's still in its sort of embryonic phases too, right?
It is, but somebody needs to be
Oh, yeah.
documenting that now for
Right,
sure,
right,
before people die.
Right,
Because,
right.
you know.
Right. But one thing I noticed in reading the book is that you credit each individual by name who contributes a recipe to the book, and I thought that was terrific, and I would imagine that a lot of people that did that felt invested in the project, other than wanting a cut of the profits.
Yeah, right. I think so. My goal, I really wanted to honor these folks, and I wanted to honor them by telling their story and also telling the story of the group that they belong to. And it was interesting to me. More than one person said, I didn't think anybody cared anymore. I didn't think anybody cared or even remembered my family restaurant, And yeah, again, this was my goal. It was to honor these people. I did an oral history interview with Angelo DeVitis, I don't know, about 20 years ago, and he said to me, you honor my family. And I thought, wow, I hadn't really thought about it. And I have to say, I embarked on this project very much with my librarian hat on, and I didn't expect. It was very, it was emotional for me,
Sure.
too. It really was. It was very gratifying. Yeah.
Well, and related to your including individuals' names with the recipes, also for each chapter on each nationality, you include sections on church life and organizations, community organizations. Mm-hmm. And, I think this question's almost like a softball for you, but because it's so up your alley. But, how did you research that stuff? Was that a lot of that material stuff that you almost had at hand already, or did you have to do some digging?
Some of it was already on hand. Churches, for early immigrants, churches and clubs were sort of the anchors for these folks. That's where they, associated with people. Yeah. That were from their same country or same religion, and no, there was quite. I started with there were a lot of church histories in the special collections archives, but I used the Beacon Journal mostly for that, and I developed a little trick. So if I could figure out when the church was established, and then I would research it 50 years later. Because usually there was a 50th anniversary article in the paper, and then there'd be a whole history, of the church. So that was one of my little tricks for researching them. And I did reach out directly to some churches and organizations too. And for every chapter, I did have someone from the community review each chapter, to look for obvious, glaring errors or omissions. And, if I left out your family restaurant or, I'm really sorry. But, my intention was never to write a comprehensive history. It was just to kind of give you a snapshot of what life was like for these people.
Sometimes churches and like community organizations even come out with cookbooks for their. So
they do.
Those there,
yeah.
Because you find that'd be help.
Yes.
Make things a little easier, I would think.
Yes,
yeah,
for
we
sure.
got that. So I'm curious, have you personally cooked any of these recipes?
I have.
Okay. Do you have any favorites?
I do. There's a really good recipe in the Hungarian chapter, and I'm sure I'm going to botch this pronunciation. I think it's called sekeli goulash, and it's not your traditional goulash. It has cubed pork and sauerkraut and cabbage and sour cream. What's not to like? It's almost more like a stroganoff.
Okay.
But it's very delicious, and it's served over either noodles or, whatever your ethnicities dumplings are.
Right,
Spätzle. Did I pronounce that right? Spätzle or nokedli or let's see, that's good. I have several that I want to try. There are 2 Italian spaghetti sauce recipes in there, and I did not hesitate to include 2 because, as you know, every family has their own recipe. Sometimes they call it Sunday sauce. Right. Sometimes they call it gravy. Yes. And both the recipes are very different. They're both really delicious. And the one I particularly like is from Tina Catalano Felicetta. Where is she? She's right over here. She's my new friend. Great recipe. How old are you, Tina? 96. She's 96. Yeah, and And it's actually Tina's mother's recipe, so this is the real deal. Yeah.
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 I guess this might sound like a stereotype, but I have a few good buddies who are Italian, and every one of them claims that their mother's food is the best. Every Italian restaurant stinks. You know, it's like, oh, you know.
Oh, I know.
You know, you name like the best restaurants in Akron or Cleveland. You know, this place is great. No,
Don't like
taste right.
their red sauce
Really
is
doesn't.
wrong.
It's usually the sauce.
It's the red sauce.
That's
Yeah,
usually the problem.
Yeah.
So, I have one last question before we open things up for general questions from people, and sort of a simple question, but may not be. It's what's the deal with sauerkraut balls?
Well, what's not to like, right? Is there anybody in this room who has not tasted a sauerkraut ball? Oh, Parazod. You can get them at the Acme, Parazod. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, you know, it's Akron's official food. I think it was 1981 that Jane Snow did a survey of Akronites, of readers, and they rose to the top over, I think, Swenson's, and I can't remember what else. But I've kind of been obsessed with sauerkraut balls since I was a kid. The first time I tasted them was at the Highland Square Brown Derby, where they were served complimentary. And I remember going there with my parents. We would take my grandmother. She lived on Dodge Avenue. We'd pick her up. We'd sit at this big round table. We always sat at the same table. Parents would order their cocktails. We'd order our Shirley Temples. And then we were allowed to go in the bar and get the sauerkraut balls. And so I've loved them ever since. I started making them, I think, when I was in high school. I still don't know what recipe I used. So I've kind of been a little obsessed with sauerkraut balls. My family can attest to that.
Aren't they kind of like a real local thing?
They are,
I
okay.
mean, you go to other places and they have no idea. They don't even know. They almost, when you say it, they're like, what?
Yeah.
A ball of sauerkraut.
So if you search sauerkraut balls on newspapers.com, almost all the hits are Ohio, and most of them are the Akron Beacon Journal. Because, and I will just tell you this, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but I think they were invented in Cleveland. There are a couple of other theories, but I'm pretty sure they were invented by Gruber's in Cleveland, which was a kind of a white tablecloth restaurant up in Cleveland. But they're certainly more popular in Akron than any place in the world. Yeah. But there were a lot of mysteries. You know, there's been a lot.
This is very true. That's true. I mean, most places don't even have a.
Oh no, no, they were like, well, "What are you talking about, sauerkraut? Well, that sounds disgusting." Yeah. So I did solve some mysteries. There really, truly was a bunny bee, even though the people who make them now, Ascot Foods, they didn't know if there was a bunny bee. They didn't even know the history of sauerkraut balls. Okay. So I think I can say that I know more about sauerkraut balls, at least in northeastern Ohio, than anyone in the world. So.
Well, that's your sequel, I guess. You're a 900-page book on sauerkraut balls. The world needs this.
And the recipe in northeastern Ohio, like if you go down to, they're also popular around Columbus and Cincinnati, but down there they're made with, often made with, here they're made with pork and ham and corned beef, fresh pork. But if you go like around Cincinnati, Columbus, they're made with cream cheese and sausage, which is an abomination.
I was going to say.
I've had good ones, but they're not real. They're not the same thing. But anyway, is there anybody who doesn't like sauerkraut balls? See?
To have one is to love one, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I'm looking at the clock, and it looks like it's a good time to open things up. If anyone has any questions for Judy, I guess you go through Mary. She's got the microphone. You can step down to the microphone, or she can bring it to you. Okay, one question right up front here, but we want to make sure everyone can hear it. So let's get the...
Okay.
Yeah, but they won't hear you back there.
How do you deal with a little this, a little that in the recipe?
Oh, my gosh. That is a great question.
Well,
Yeah.
I think this is on, John?
It
Hello?
is, it
Okay.
is, yeah.
That is
So her question
Yeah, that's
was,
fine.
why don't you repeat the question?
How do you deal with a little this and a little that in the recipes?
That's a great question because, and I can't tell you how many people said to me, oh man, I don't think I can give you that recipe. You know, I don't really have it written down, you know. And there was a lot of back and forth with people. You know, they'd send me a recipe and they'd say, you know, 1/4 cup of ground nuts. Well, what kind of nuts? You know? So there was a lot of back and forth with people. But yeah, there was a lot of verification, and it definitely was tricky. And I had people who just simply said, I don't have anything. My grandmother never wrote that recipe down. Hence why we should all be writing our recipes down. Thank you. That's a good question.
I deal with it a lot.
Hey, Marty.
Did you finally unearth the real Canova's recipe?
Oh, I did
Answer
find that
Repeat
somewhere.
the question.
Oh, did I find the real Canova's chili recipe? Yeah, it was published somewhere in some sort of a little booklet that I think the Beacon Journal put out a few years ago.
Jane Snow did an article when I first came home, so that would have been 95, 96, it was right around in there, and there were all these theories and murkiness and stealth and
Okay.
spying and all this other kind of stuff between the varying factions. And I made the ones that were in there.
Not the same. Yeah, yeah,
They were good, but they were not Canova's.
yeah.
That's me back.
So
Hey,
Judy, you know, I think this is really kind of a feminist manifesto. And I just want to hear what you think about sort of the hidden history of women in your book.
That's a good question too, Jean. You know, as I was researching individuals for the book, it's hard sometimes to find information about women. You know, again, it's, you know, Mrs. Harry Smith died, you know, and her first name may or may not have been in there. You know, you could find an article about, you know, such and such restaurant. Well, you know what? Even though, you know, Nunzio DiPaolo, I'm just making that that name up, you know, it was his restaurant. I guarantee you she was there as much as he was, you know, along with you know, raising their, you know, 7 children. Women were, yeah, it is a feminist manifesto. I think you're right, you know, and some of the stories are, there are stories of, some of them are funny, but some of them are really poignant, you know, and some of them are sad, and you realize, gosh, women did not have it easy. And they did everything, you know, they made everything from scratch, and they made do with what they had. And sometimes they were poor. You know, they didn't have the convenience that we have now, but thanks, that was a good question. Yes?
African-American rib recipes, I find are hidden. Very hard to get it out of people what the recipe is.
African-American rib recipes, this gentleman is saying it's hard to get them. I did try to get a rib recipe. And the gentleman who I asked, he was very gracious, but he offered me a different recipe instead. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's like, nope, not giving you my rib recipe. Yeah.
Hey, Judy.
Yeah, hey, Pam.
What did you think that you knew but were surprised after you did more research, or just in general, what surprises did you encounter as you were researching the book?
One of the things is I didn't realize how big a population there are of Hungarians in this community. You know, we always think the Germans, the big one, but there were quite a number of Hungarians too. Surprises? I don't know. I can tell you, one of the things I didn't expect was it really helped me to understand what life was like back in the 30s and the 40s or the 20s or whatever, you know, to understand, you know, what life was like for them. And some of them were, of course, you know, they were immigrants, so they did experienced discrimination, and some of them were maligned, some more than others. And yeah, it kind of put me in the middle of it. I really felt like, and my family is from here, so I was kind of imagining, you know, what was life like for my grandparents when they went out to dinner in the 1930s and went to church, and, you know, my grandparents belonged to the local German clubs, and yeah, it really kind of made things very real for me, I think. Yeah.
Okay, how many of your recipes did you taste test?
I think I've taste tested maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 or so. Yeah, probably should have taste tested all of them, but I wouldn't be sitting here today. It would be another 10 years. This was supposed to be a 2-year project. It took 4.5 years. Hey, Ron.
I've got a question. It's sort of basic. Did you have any difficulty in differentiating between the recipes for a group for the family versus how they served it to the population in a restaurant, especially the ingredients and the availability of ingredients in the local area?
There were a couple of recipes that were adapted for home use. For example, the Polish American Club's pierogi recipe is in the book. Yeah, I know. Their original recipe. And those folks are still making pierogi by hand. And if you go on Friday night, you can get it at their fish fry, best perch fish fry in town. But the church or the kitchen manager took the recipe and she pared it down for home use. I think there are maybe 1 or 2 others too. Yeah.
Let me appendix to that. The Ukrainian recipe at the Ukrainian church was superb.
Oh, I went to their festival a couple of years ago. That was some good food. And every ethnicity, they all have their own cabbage roll recipe, right? Hey, Russ.
How you doing?
I'm good.
I just want to go back to the sauerkraut balls again. You said they were perfected in Cleveland, or not perfected, but invented in Cleveland?
Yes.
I'm just here to tell you, no, they were invented in Cleveland, but they were perfected at my house.
Oh, really? And Kate, is this true?
You better nod yes.
See, aren't they the best? Oh, yes.
Any research into why JoJos are pretty much strictly Akron?
Oh, no, I didn't, but I know. I don't know.
So he's asking about JoJos.
Yeah.
JoJo's a thing in Akron?
Maybe somebody here knows. I don't know. I mean, I think they're made elsewhere, but they're not called JoJos. They're called potato logs or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Hi, it's Katie.
Oh, hey, Katie.
I remember, and I wish I kept her name, there was before I left the paper, obviously, I got a call from a blogger who was a food blogger who was insistent that JoJo's also had were iconic in areas of the Northwest, and was terribly insistent about this. And I did a little research, and it looked like there were some areas, I can't remember, Portland, Seattle, whatever, somewhere northwesty, had JoJo's. And so I ended up talking to, I think it was Michael Tricasso, led me to, he was pretty sure that it was a maker of, the maker of the equipment. He suggested I call, what is the pizza shop? They're still in town. They claim there's a pizza shop in town that claims, I think it might be a Meteo's. I'd have to double check. That claims they were the first server of JoJo's in Akron. What was that? Yes. Sorry. And it's on their website, and they. Yeah, Fiesta Chicken, Rizzi Pizza, Fiesta Chicken. And they, and the guy there and Michael were talking about with me, and I fed all this information to a blogger, and I wish I had kept it. That there was the theory was that there was a guy or a restaurant equipment company that was selling chicken roasters, and said there's another way that you could use these, and you could deep fry potatoes, which is how it started, and bread them first. This was just one theory on it, and maybe that same restaurant equipment supplier ended up out in Northwest United States. I don't know, made moderate sense to me.
That's great. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, someone said it was Rizzy's. Rizzy's restaurant.
Rizzy's, yeah.
There's a Rizzy's recipe in the cookbook, a cake recipe.
So I think we're about to the end of this. Judy, I'd like it if maybe you'd read the last paragraph of your introduction. I'm putting her on the spot here.
Oh, I think you are. I didn't know about this.
You claim you wrote this
Excuse me.
book. Let's see if
Okay. Okay, all right. You honor my family. I will never forget these words of gratitude spoken by Angelo DeVitas when I interviewed him in 2000 for an oral history project to document Akron's neighborhoods. Over the course of an hour, he shared the history of his family and its iconic North Akron food business. He was not alone. Almost everyone we spoke with shared memories of neighborhood markets, bakeries, restaurants, and memorable family meals and recipes, many of which have been lost. Like old photographs, family recipes connect us to our past and are gifts and treasures to be preserved. If you are the keeper of your family's precious recipes, please be sure to write them down and share them with your children and grandchildren. In the meantime, I hope that the Akron Family Recipes Cookbook contributes in some small way to preserving and celebrating Akron's family food traditions. I hope I have honored your families.
So Judy is going to be signing books and would be happy to say hi to people. My old standing on the stage thing's coming back to me. You do need to exit out those doors there, and then if you go around the corner, there's a hallway, and she'll be at the table down there. So again, thank you, Judy. You have indeed
Thank
honored
you. It was my pleasure.
many families.
It was
Thank you
fun.
very much.
I guess this is what we have to do to get everybody in one place, right? Thank you.